Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where we talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Clarice. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's take a look at the case that VICAP ended up getting this episode, and it was a boy named Cody who had been missing for 10 months. But his body was discovered, and so now it's a whole situation, trying to figure out what happened. Initially, Paul was dealing with other things in this episode, which we'll get to his side of things later on. So Clark was kind of in charge of a lot of stuff, and he's a little out there, and just especially the way he's treating Esquivel this episode. It's he's already kind of a little this and that, but even later on, Esquivel's I've kind of had it up to here with all his racist remarks and stuff, but Clark was kind of in asshole mode this episode, but we kind of find out later on why this particular case strikes him so hard about a kid, especially because Clarice is the way the body's in there, it's almost like they're trying to protect him, because it's this almost looks like a wound that the Cody's body was found in, which obviously it's he wasn't protected. If he was protected, he wouldn't be in the situation he is right now. He wouldn't be dead. That's what it meant to protect. And so it's Clarice could definitely pick up on there's something here the way Clark was acting during this case. But because later on he kind of pisses off Tripodi, because he's because obviously once again correlating to the Paul stuff, Tripodi's there's obviously something going on in that case, but he was he's wanting to protect his family. You should know that better than anyone. And then he stops and says, I'm sorry, I get it, this case, and just hangs up, because, Tripodi's I get it, you're still an asshole for going to that level, because we learned about his circumstances last episode. So for Murray to kind of throw that at him like that, obviously a low blow, but he was just heated. And we kind of find out later on, because Tripodi ends up telling Esquivel. Basically, when he was 16, Murray's sister, who was 13 at the time, ended up getting taken from their front lawn. I guess she was outside or whatever, and he was the only one home. So he feels that's what that line was about. It's he feels oh, she should have been protected. I should have protected her. So seeing kids that are about his sister's age death like that, it makes him remind him of his own failures. I was meant to protect my sister and I didn't. It turns out all those porn magazines, he had heard, they said some cop or whatever had told him years later that oh, I thought I saw your sister in one of those mags, in one of those type of child, I think, things. Or rather, probably more I think it was more so just porn mags in general. She could have been I think it might be kind of referencing she might have gotten kidnapped and maybe put into a sex trafficking type of thing or whatever. And so that's why he keeps all those porn mags, because he's trying to look through it to be okay, see if he finds his sister. So that's what that's all about. The fact is he keeps them in his desk too. I think that's a kind of a pertinent thing we'll circle back to, because I think it kind of correlates to why Clarice is keeping a certain picture. We'll go back to it later, but I think it's interesting how that I think that kind of signifies something. But nevertheless, looking into this case, Clarice has Ardelia kind of running some DNA, and she's the one that using mitochondria DNA ended up figuring out that there's a correlation between Cody's death and another kid 12 years prior named Bobby. And obviously Ardelia, this is her first time out in the field, so she's excited about it, but obviously it's not under the best circumstances, and they end up talking to Bobby's mom. And obviously for Ardelia, it's she grew up in this neighborhood, so she knows the area pretty well. So when Uncle Terrence was oh, she's not here, blah, 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 kind of shooing them away, Ardelia is no, you're going to do what I asked you to, and you're going to take us to Bobby's mom. And so, it turns out obviously Terrence has his own theories that oh, the police killed that boy, and they covered it up, But that's the shame, and that's why this hits Ardelia too, because it's this is a kid a black kid that ended up dying, and the cops just didn't care. But now, oh, it's a white kid, Cody, that dies. I mean, that's the sad thing. It took Cody's case to open this back up, to open up Bobby's case, and it's just that thing of he's getting this visual, he's getting all this national attention. Where was all that for Bobby? A grieving mother that wants an answers on both sides, both Bobby as well as with Cody as well. So obviously they're looking into it, and obviously for Clarice, it's whoever did this had to be a male, just because of how messy it was. Women, she's saying that mostly women would have been tidy. It wouldn't have been something. The scenes wouldn't be kind of what they are. And obviously their initial thought is like, oh, it's got to be like Uncle Terrence or whatever. But when they run the DNA, it turns out it's actually the Miss Kern, Mary Beth Kern, the friendly neighbor and stuff like that. And it's like, really? It's like, obviously it doesn't fit the profile and stuff like that. But then they remember mitochondria DNA is where they're pulling it from. So obviously a mother and a child are going to share DNA, so it's like, oh, it must be her son. But obviously we didn't get too much into their history. We know that she's no longer with her husband, she's with someone else now. It's like, where is your son? And it's like, well, he's living with his dad. So it's like, you were wondering what was going on there. And then later on, when Clarice looks at the family picture and sees the birthmark that Mary Beth's husband has, you're like, oh my God. It turns out, she married her son. It's like, that's fucked up. Now you kind of unraveling the case and kind of learning like what happened to him. At such a young age, he was abused. Like after his dad left, she was so angry and just alone that she latched onto her son. So, and as Clarice is saying, her hate for her husband ran deeper than her love for her son, in the sense that like she just wanted to kind of punish her husband to a certain extent by doing that. And so it was more like a hate-filled thing rather than it being like, oh, you love your son, because if you loved your son you would have never done that, but because you hate your husband, you resent him, you have so much all these negative feelings towards it that kind of almost get back at him. You slept with your son. And it was like, and for him, he confided in both Cody and Bobby, because obviously they were neighbors at one point in time. So it's like, especially with Bobby, it's like, so like they were kind of friends, and for him, he didn't have anyone he can talk to about it. It's like, it's his mom, it's a thing of like, oh, his mom's like, you can't tell anyone, this is kind of our thing. And it's like, he confided in Bobby, but he ended up having to kill Bobby because it's like, he panicked because he's like, I shouldn't have told anyone, because the reason why is because they're both boys who didn't have fathers in their lives. And it was almost a thing of like, oh, are they like me? And I think that's more so why, like, the womb representation, as like Clarice was saying, like, I think that's where that comes into place, where it's like, these were kids that were actually loved by their mom without the stuff going on to them. So, in his own way, it was almost like putting them in that hole in the walls, wherever, like a womb, was almost like him being like, oh, these are mothers who are supposed to protect their children. These are mothers who love their children and want to protect them, not like mine, who did what she did to me. And it's sad, that it created all of this. Yes, there's some peace at mind. They got justice for Bobby and Cody, and gave their parents some peace of mind, but it's still just like, man, that's disturbing and effed up. Granted, because of this, Ardelia did kind of, it's like Paul was like, don't worry, you're going to get the credit for this. And it's like, because Ardelia did put in all the work, she's the one that kind of figured out the DNA situation. But what was also interesting too, because we got to spend time with her grandmother this episode, and her grandmother is so proud of her, because it's like, oh, like, look at my granddaughter's working her way up. And it's like, obviously, like, there's a whole black coalition thing that's going on, which obviously she was talked to about it this episode. But it's like, nah, you have 11 other people. You let them see that they're not alone, that there's other people out there. And those 11, people can represent, kind of almost be an entire army in its own right, just because the strength of people who will realize, oh, we're not alone. Even though we're small in number, we're not alone. And that in itself speaks volumes. But her grandmother was telling her not to, like, stir the pot. Just kind of stay where you are, go slow, rise up through the rank, and change things from the inside. So her grandma's more slow and steady wins the race, while the Black Coalition is about let's hit it hard and fast type of situation. So, but we kind of find out more about her dad, because it's like, her grandma's like, you should know better than anyone, like, because of your dad's situation, have you gone to visit him? And we find out, like, why earlier on Ardelia wasn't too thrown out by Uncle Terrence's idea of, like, maybe it was the cops, because for her, she has a personal experience of that to a certain extent, in the sense that, like, her father was, whatever his condition is, it sounds like he got very badly beat up, and it was by a cop, because he was like a laborer, and I think because of the time and everything, which obviously at the time of the setting of this story, it's not like things are all great, but they're better, but there's still obviously work to be done in that regard. But she had actually talked about the fact is, like, with her dad, that story about, like, the stubble, so she likes to go back after that, like, I'm assuming like the nurses or whatever have shaved him after like, a day or two after they've shaved him, just so she could feel that stubble again, because it reminds her of when she was younger and used to kind of snuggle against that stubble, which obviously we get Clarice kind of bringing up obviously a story about her dad, kind of like the last memory she has of her dad is actually the night before he died, because they spent that time together. And for her, it's like, actually it was kind of like the best night ever, just kind of more stuff that she kind of brought up in episode 2 about her dad, about him being the law, him being him kind of being almost like the law and order in himself, in that regard of just him being kind of like he can like kind of go anywhere anyhow just because he was that powerful of a person, And I think that probably messes with you on some level when you look at your dad as someone so powerful that he can kind of go anywhere to anyone and anywhere without issue, and to know that like for him to be taken out like that, I think because probably in her head it was like, oh, my dad's the biggest badass ever, like no one's going to mess with him, and probably lose him like that. Probably, I'm sure there's layers to like the psychological kind of mental damage that it probably did to Clarice in certain regards. So, but it was an interesting insight into her dad. There's that side of everything, but then there's also the situation with Clarice going to Paul and being like, whoa, this is it, you found the guy. And it's like, what? The guy from I've been stuck with his face in my head for the past week. This is it. And it's like, Joe, it's like, no, he's like an attorney or whatever. It's like, no, this is the guy. And Paul's not willing to really listen, but everyone else is still kind of like, well, if Clarice says that's the case, she says that's the guy, then it's got to be. But Paul kind of pushes back, and that actually leads to some complications in the team, because Tripati's kind of like, isn't it kind of weird how Paul got super defensive about that? But obviously for Murray, he's like, I understand, like, obviously what Paul is going through with kind of a nasty divorce right now. The fact of the matter is, this guy's just his lawyer, but it's like, as Tripati says, like, yeah, if it like quacks and walks like a duck, it's a duck, right? You can't tell me that. No, what he was actually saying is, like, you can't tell me this looks like a duck, that basically, like, not all this is coming together, like, it's trying to seem like, oh, it's just this one thing of, oh, he's the attorney, because it's like, it seems like him and Joe have history prior to now, and it's why Joe was able to reach out to him, at the very least, it seemed. But I guess it's like, well, I think it also correlates, because he made it seem like I think it was like their kids went to go to the same school, but beyond that, like, and now that I think about it, last episode, they didn't really talk about whether or not they had further history beyond that. Like, you would assume they do, but it's like, how do you know him? And it's like, oh, the guy just kind of came to me about, wanting to be my lawyer, but maybe he didn't want to dive into that too much because that's his personal life and he doesn't want to kind of drag it to the forefront and all this. But obviously, willing to listen to what Clarice has to say, it's like, all right, I'm going to... obviously, without letting her know, it's like, okay, I'm going to go meet up with him, but Tripati, I want you to kind of keep an eye on him. And during the meeting, Joe kind of made it clear, like, oh, like, depends on what kind of, at the end of the day, when it comes to this divorce, what kind of man do you want to be? Do you want to be someone who kind of held his punches, or do you want to go for the jugular? Because it's like all this stuff about, yeah, your wife at parties, her blacking out, we'll have people testifying about her getting drunk on the, like, obviously trying to destroy her credibility, destroy her as a person, just so he can ensure he get his children back. But for him, it's like, I'm not going to go down that route, even if it is to get my kids. I'm not going to do that to her because this is the woman he loves. Yeah, things are complicated, sure, but he's not willing to go down that route. So it's like, oh, let me think about it. So Tripati follows him a little bit, ends up going to that lab that Marilyn was connected to, Lockyer's. So it's like, okay, so there's some correlation, there's some connection here. And obviously it gets brought up to Paul later on because they're like, they're trying to ask Paul to look into it. But Paul shuts it down because he just got a call from Joe being like, oh, so have you thought about what I said? Yeah, I'm not making myself clear. I know all there is to know about you. I can get to your kids whenever I want to. So if you want your kids, the fact of the matter is you might want to kind of listen to what I say about dropping this case because, hey, also that evidence that kind of looked like it got tampered with, well, we kind of made it look like you're the one that was responsible for it. So you won't have to worry about getting your kids if you're in jail. It's like, so you can avoid jail and you can also have your kids. So let me get you your kids for you. So Paul comes out being like, yeah, circumstantial evidence, this and that, saying shutting down everything, which you can tell there's a look from Clark where it's almost like his BS radar, because it seems like out of anyone, he has the biggest, most sensitive BS radar where he's like, whoa, I'm smell BS in the air. Obviously for Clarice, it's like, I'm the only, like, that was something she had talked about with Ardelia, where it's like, she's the only one that can clearly see Joe in her mind, but no one else can. And so for her, it's like, it's an uphill battle. And even when it seems like she's got other people on her side, even Tripodi and Esquivel, even in that moment, it just seems like Paul shuts it down. And that's the most effed up thing about it, is because, yes, Paul's doing this to protect his family. It is also self-preservation too. Like, you could have turned to your team. Granted, you're dealing with someone powerful that can make evidence disappear, who can kind of ruin you. Yes, but I think you should have had faith in your team. It's like, they could have probably worked with you to find a way out of this. But what makes it sadder is, yes, I understand where you're doing this and coming from with it. Yes, it's a little, like I said, selfish. But what makes it worse is you're making Clarice seem like she's crazy. It's like, all this stuff in her head, she's crazy, don't believe her. It's like, you're disparaging her. Like, all this time, it seemed like you're trying to build her up, and now in this one moment, it feels like you're just breaking her down. Like I said, you understand it, but it is also the thing of, like, you called Clarice out for all this and stuff, and it's just like, you're coming off like a hypocrite now. And once again, it's the thing of that you kind of feel bad for him, but at the same time, it's like what he's doing, kind of making Clarice feel like she's crazy, is BS. And like I said, Clark kind of looks at her, and she looks at him, and she takes that one of those pictures of Joe, and she puts it in her drawer, kind of very similar to how, like I was bringing up earlier, how Clark keeps those mags in his drawer, because I think it's just kind of the thing of, like, these things that we won't let rest, even if we can't put, like, they're going to be here, they're going to be a priority, especially in her case. Obviously, on another angle is the whole Ardelia thing, like choosing to back away from the coalition. And it's like, well, who told you to do that? Clarice? And it's like, my dad. He's like, well, tell him I disagree. And it's like, well, you shouldn't be saying that. So, meaning you, I mean, to be fair, Ardelia doesn't, I mean, only Clarice recently learned about her dad's Ardelia's dad's situation. So it makes sense. Home dude wouldn't either. It's Harris, right? If I'm not mistaken, the agent's name. But, knowing his circumstances, of course you can understand why Ardelia would want to take it slow, but maybe in his mind it's like, your dad's situation is why we should do what we're doing, kind of like fast and hard, once again, kind of go for the jugular rather than try to work at it from the inside and kind of make the change from the inside. So we've got things on that front as well. So a lot of really interesting things, to break down about this episode. I'm ultimately very interested to see where all of this goes, because obviously I doubt with Joe is going to stop here, because it's interesting, because he had said, like, that's why I picked you in the first place, because I thought it was just to kind of keep an ear and eye on their investigation. But to be fair, it's like, well, he's already got enough an ear and eye without being so connected. But it's like, he got this close to Paul so that he could use this against Paul. So it's like, that's why I chose you specifically, because you have so much to lose, and that gives us leverage against you. Well, it seems like he might be the top dog in all this, but we don't know. Like, he might be part of a kind of a cabal or other, like, group. There might be other people involved, or maybe he is the top dog. Maybe, I kind of get the feeling like he's not, but I mean, he is the one that talked directly to Marilyn, but he could be like the in-between guy. He might not, like I said, might not be the top dog, but he might be the dude. Once again, it's kind of interesting. I brought it up last episode. The last time I saw him, he was playing a scummy character in Blind Spot. Here he is playing a scummy character again. That particular actor, I feel bad for him, kind of getting back-to-back scummy characters like that. Wasn't this character's name Sherry in Blind Spot? I could be mistaken. Regardless, the point is just kind of diving into, why this whole... He kind of set up this whole him and Paul thing to begin with. It was really interesting. But like I said, I'm really interested to see where all this takes us. The point I was going to make, sorry, a little all over the place, sorry. I thought maybe it might not just be about shutting down a case. Might feel the need to kind of go to Paul for other stuff too. It's like, I need this to kind of go away too. I need to handle this, and this. So it's going to be that thing of probably pushing Paul further and further. It's like, how far are you willing to go before you break? Like, how far across that line are you willing to go? Because he seems to be a very honorable person, that he's very by the books. He tries to, be that. And it's like, for him to be kind of crossing that line now. I'm assuming Clarice is going to find out and kind of call him out on his BS. Then again, it might be Clark, because Clark is the one who knows Paul the best and understands him the best. So we'll ultimately have to wait and see where things kind of go on that front. Plus also the divorce situation, especially because it's like, okay, he's going to help me with my kids if I keep quiet and shut down all this stuff. Who knows if hopefully Paul has a his conscience gets to him and he kind of goes like, all right, guys, this is what's up. And he does it of his own volition. It doesn't take them digging up stuff on him to finally make him confess. So, like I said, we'll have to wait and see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.